No one in the quiet town of Brier Glen ever knew the real story of how Susan Rivers came into the world, or more painfully, how she was almost erased from it. She was only 1 year old when her biological mother, Vanessa Cole, made a decision that would shape Susan's entire life. It was a cold October evening when Vanessa arrived at a small roadside diner, her eyes restless, her hands trembling as she held the baby wrapped in a faded pink blanket. Sitting across from her was a man named Derek Halston, a truck driver with tired eyes and a weathered face. Money sat in an envelope between them. "You promised you'd take her," Vanessa whispered, sliding the envelope forward. Derek frowned. "I said I'd help you. I didn't think you meant like this." Vanessa's voice hardened. "I can't raise her. I won't survive it. Just take the money." But Derek never took the child. He took the envelope and left the baby behind when guilt swallowed him whole. Hours later, a retired Army sergeant named Gabriel Thornton found the crying child near the diner's back entrance. He had only stopped to buy coffee. When he heard the cries, he followed the sound. Hey now," he murmured, lifting the baby gently. She clutched his jacket instantly. Something in his chest shifted. "Looks like it's you and me tonight, little soldier." That night, Gabriel made a decision that would define both their lives. He took her home. Gabriel Thornton had never planned to be a father. War had taken too much from him, friends, peace, and the chance at a family of his own. Yet when he placed the baby in a basket beside his bed, he found himself sitting awake, watching her breathe. The next morning, his neighbor Mrs. Darlene Whitaker burst through his front door after hearing the news spread through town. "Gabe, you cannot just keep a whole baby like a stray puppy," she scolded, hands on her hips. Gabriel remained calm. She wasn't claimed. Sheriff ran it. No reports. Darlene softened when she looked at the child. "Lord, she's beautiful." Gabriel nodded slowly. "Name's Susan. Found it stitched on her blanket." Darlene sat beside him. "You planning to raise her?" He hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I think I am." Raising Susan was not easy. His military pension barely covered food and bills. Their house was small, paint-peeling roof aging, but it was filled with discipline and quiet love. When Susan turned 5, she once asked him at dinner, "Daddy, did I come from your tummy or your heart?" Gabriel nearly dropped his fork. He cleared his throat. "From my heart, kiddo. Strongest place there is." She smiled wide. "Good. That means I can't get lost." He didn't tell her then how close she had come to being lost forever. By the time Susan started school, whispers had already begun weaving through Brier Glen. Children repeated what they heard at home, often without understanding the cruelty behind their words. One afternoon on the playground, a boy named Trent Lawson cornered her near the swings. "My mom says your real mother sold you," he blurted. Susan froze. "That's not true." Trent shrugged. "Then why don't you look like Sergeant Thornton?" She ran home in tears that day, bursting through the door. "Daddy, am I yours?" she cried. Gabriel, who had been repairing a kitchen chair, immediately knelt in front of her. "Who told you that?" She sniffled. "They said I was bought." His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed gentle. "Listen to me, Susan. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. I chose you." She searched his eyes. "So you won't give me away?" He pulled her into a firm hug. "Never. Not for all the money in the world." That night, however, Gabriel sat alone on the porch, the weight of truth pressing on him. He knew one day she would ask again, and next time, she would be old enough to demand the full story. Money was always tight in the Thornton household. Susan learned early that new clothes came from thrift stores and birthdays meant homemade cake instead of parties. Yet she never felt poor in the ways that mattered. Gabriel attended every school recital, every award ceremony. Once, when she apologized for needing supplies for a science project, he waved her off. "Education isn't an expense, soldier. It's ammunition." She laughed. "You always make school sound like war." He smirked. "Life is war. I'm just training you to win." When Susan turned 13, she found an old locked box in Gabriel's closet while looking for winter blankets. "Daddy, what's this?" she asked, holding it up at dinner. His expression changed instantly. Just old papers. She tilted her head. Can I see? He shook his head firmly. Not yet. The tension lingered. That night, Susan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Something in her gut told her that box held answers. Answers about where she came from and why the town looked at her the way it did. The truth began clawing its way to the surface when Susan was 16. She had taken a part-time job at the same roadside diner where Gabriel had first found her, though she didn't know that yet. One evening, an elderly waitress named Martha Klein kept staring at her. Finally, Martha asked softly, "Honey, are you Sergeant Thornton's girl?" Susan smiled. "Yes, ma'am." Martha's eyes grew distant. "You know, I was working the night he found you." Susan's tray nearly slipped from her hands. "Found me?" Martha realized what she had revealed and sighed. "He never told you?" Susan shook her head slowly. Martha pulled her into a booth. "Your mama left you out back. There was money involved, ugly business." Susan's chest tightened. "So, I was abandoned." Martha reached for her hand. "Left, yes, but not unloved. That man who raised you? He fought for you when no one else did." Susan went home in silence that night. Gabriel was reading when she entered. She stood in front of him, voice shaking. "Daddy, tell me how you really found me." He looked up, eyes heavy, knowing the moment he had feared for 16 years had finally arrived. Gabriel did not answer immediately. He closed his book slowly, removing his glasses as if buying time he no longer had. Susan stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her hands trembling slightly. "Where did you find me?" she asked again, her voice softer but firmer. Gabriel exhaled deeply and gestured to the couch. "Sit down, soldier." She sat, but her eyes never left his face. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I found you behind Miller's diner. You were crying cold alone." Susan's breath caught. "So, it's true she left me?" Gabriel nodded once. "Yes." Silence swallowed the room. "Was there money?" she whispered. He hesitated just for a second too long. Tears filled her eyes. "There was money?" He nodded again, heavier this time. Susan stood abruptly, pacing. "So I was sold." Gabriel rose too. "No. Listen to me. You were abandoned, but you were never worthless. You hear me?" She wiped her face angrily. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked for the first time. "Because I never wanted you to feel unwanted. Not for 1 second." She stopped pacing, looking at him. "You chose me?" He stepped closer. "Every day. Not just that night, every single day after." That answer didn't erase the pain, but it planted something else beside it, understanding. That night, Susan barely slept. She sat by her window watching the streetlights flicker, replaying every memory of her childhood. Nothing about Gabriel's love had been fake. If anything, it had been stronger than most biological bonds she'd seen. The next morning at breakfast, the air was quiet until she finally spoke. "Do you know her name?" Gabriel looked up from his coffee. "Vanessa Cole." Susan repeated it slowly. "Vanessa." The name felt foreign on her tongue. "Is she alive?" Gabriel nodded. "Last I heard, yes." Susan stared at her plate. "I want to find her." Gabriel did not react with anger, only concern. "Why?" She swallowed. "I need to know why wasn't enough." He reached across the table. "Susan, her leaving was about her weakness, not your worth." She nodded faintly. "I still need to hear it from her." Gabriel leaned back, studying her the way he had when she was a child learning to walk. "If you go looking, I'll stand beside you. But be ready, answers don't always heal." Susan met his eyes. Not knowing hurts more. The search took months. Old records, diner logs, sheriff archives, most led nowhere. Until Mrs. Whitaker mentioned hearing Vanessa had moved 2 towns over years ago. Susan and Gabriel drove there together one quiet Saturday. The car ride was silent until Susan finally whispered, "Are you scared?" Gabriel kept his eyes on the road, terrified. She looked at him. "Why?" He answered honestly. Because I don't want anyone making you feel small, not even the woman who gave birth to you. When they arrived at a modest trailer park, Susan's hand shook. You don't have to come up, she said. Gabriel shook his head. I've had your back 16 years. I'm not stopping at the front door. They knocked. Footsteps approached slowly. The door opened to reveal a tired woman with hollow eyes, older than her years. Vanessa Cole looked at Susan and immediately knew. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. Susan's voice trembled. Are you Vanessa? She nodded weakly. You're my daughter. The word daughter sounded strange coming from her. Susan didn't step forward. Why did you leave me? Vanessa broke instantly, tears spilling. I was broke, alone, drowning in debt. Your father had just died. I thought if I gave you up, you'd have a chance. Susan's voice sharpened. You took money. Vanessa shook her head frantically. I didn't sell you. I accepted help, but I panicked. I left you where someone would find you. Susan's eyes hardened. You left me behind a diner. Vanessa sobbed. I watched from across the street until that man picked you up. She looked at Gabriel. You saved her. Silence hung heavy. Susan studied Vanessa carefully, searching for resentment, for regret, for love. Why didn't you come back? She asked. Vanessa whispered. Shame. I thought you'd hate me. Susan let out a bitter laugh. I didn't even know you. Gabriel stepped forward slightly, but let Susan lead. Vanessa wiped her tears. Did he raise you well? Susan glanced back at Gabriel. Her voice softened. He raised me with honor.
Discipline.
Love. Vanessa nodded, crying harder. Then you were never abandoned, not truly. Susan inhaled deeply. You still left. Vanessa didn't defend herself this time.
Yes.
I did. They sat inside the small trailer for hours talking. Vanessa told stories about Susan's birth, her first laugh, how she used to grip her finger when she slept. Susan listened, conflicted. These were memories she had never known yet somehow belonged to her. At one point she asked quietly, Did you ever try to find me? Vanessa nodded.
Once.
I drove to Brier Glen, saw you at a school fair with him. She glanced at Gabriel. You were smiling. I realized you were better without me. Susan's eyes filled. You should have at least said goodbye. Vanessa whispered. I didn't think I deserved to. When it was time to leave, Vanessa walked them to the door. I don't expect forgiveness, she said softly. Susan paused on the steps. I don't hate you, she admitted. But I can't call you Mom. Vanessa nodded, accepting the boundary. You don't have to. I just needed to see the woman you became. Susan hesitated, then asked one final question. Did you ever love me? Vanessa's answer came without delay. Every day. I just wasn't strong enough to keep you. Susan studied her face, and for the first time, she believed her. The drive home felt lighter, though not painless. Halfway back, Susan spoke. I thought meeting her would fix everything. Gabriel kept driving. Did it? She considered it. No, but it filled the empty spaces with truth. After a pause, she added, You're still my father. Gabriel glanced at her, emotion tightening his throat. Always was. She smiled faintly.
Good.
Because I don't plan on sharing the title. He chuckled, wiping his eye discreetly. Months passed, and Susan began channeling her story into purpose. She volunteered at youth shelters, mentoring abandoned children. One evening, a little girl asked her, Do parents who leave ever regret it? Susan knelt beside her. Some do, some don't. But what matters is who stays. The girl asked, Who stayed for you? Susan smiled warmly. A stubborn army sergeant who found me crying and decided I was his mission. The child giggled. Sounds like a hero. Susan nodded. He is. Years later, at Susan's college graduation, Gabriel sat in the front row wearing his old service pin on his suit. When her name was called, Susan Rivers Thornton, he froze. She had added his last name. After the ceremony, he pulled her into a tight hug. You didn't have to do that, he said gruffly. She smiled through tears. I wanted the world to know who raised me. He nodded proudly. You did good, soldier. She shook her head. No, you did. As cameras flashed and families celebrated, Susan looked around, not for the woman who left her, but for the man who stayed. And in that moment, she understood something that reshaped her identity forever. She had not been defined by abandonment. She had been defined by who chose to love her anyway. Graduation marked the end of one chapter. But for Susan, it also opened doors she never imagined walking through. She accepted a position as a youth counselor at a residential care home called Haven Ridge, a place that housed abandoned and displaced children. On her first day, as she walked the halls, the echoes of young voices stirred memories she thought she had buried. A little boy sitting alone in the recreation room caught her attention. He couldn't have been more than 7. She sat beside him gently. Hey there, I'm Susan. What's your name? He didn't look up.
Eli.
She nodded. You like drawing? He shrugged. After a pause, he asked quietly, do parents ever come back? Susan felt the question land deep in her chest. She answered carefully. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But that doesn't mean you're not worth staying for. He finally looked at her. How do you know? She smiled softly. Because someone stayed for me. That answer began her bond with the children, not as a counselor who studied abandonment, but as someone who had lived through it. Susan's work quickly became personal. She stayed late, listened longer, and fought harder for every child placed under her care. One evening, Gabriel visited the center for the first time. As he watched her mediate an argument between 2 teenagers, pride filled his eyes. Later, they sat on a bench outside. You found your battlefield, he said. Susan laughed lightly. Guess your training worked. He nodded. You're turning pain into armor. She leaned her head on his shoulder. You turned it into love first. After a moment, she added, do you ever regret keeping me? Gabriel didn't even let her finish. Not 1 second. You gave my life purpose when I thought it was over. She looked at him. Then I guess we saved each other. He smiled. That's how family works. Not long after, Susan received an unexpected letter. Handwritten, shaky, familiar. It was from Vanessa. She hesitated before opening it. Inside read, I don't want to disrupt your life. I just wanted you to know I'm proud of the woman you became. Susan sat with the letter for hours before visiting her again. This time alone. When Vanessa opened the door, surprise flooded her face. Susan, I didn't expect. Susan raised a hand gently. I didn't come for apologies. Vanessa nodded slowly. Susan continued, I came to tell you I'm okay. You don't have to carry guilt forever. Tears filled Vanessa's eyes. Do you forgive me?
Susan took a breath.
I understand you. Forgiveness is a process. But I don't carry anger anymore. For Vanessa, that was more mercy than she ever expected. Years moved forward, steady and healing. Susan expanded her work, eventually founding a mentorship program called Chosen Pathways, dedicated to children raised outside biological families. At the program's first public event, she stood behind the podium, scanning the audience until her eyes found Gabriel in the front row. She smiled before speaking. People think abandonment breaks you, she began. But sometimes it reveals who is willing to build you back. After the speech, reporters approached her, asking what inspired her work. She answered simply, a man who taught me that love is a decision, not a DNA match. Gabriel pretended not to cry, but Susan saw the tears anyway. One quiet autumn evening, Susan sat on the same porch where Gabriel once wrestled with whether to tell her the truth. He joined her, handing her a cup of tea. You've done more with your pain than most people do with privilege, he said. She chuckled softly. I learned from a stubborn sergeant. They sat in peaceful silence before she spoke again. Do you ever think about that night? The diner? Gabriel nodded. Every year. She looked at him. I'm glad you stopped for coffee. He smiled. Me too. Then he added quietly, finding you was the first good thing that happened to me after the war. Susan squeezed his hand. And being found was the first good thing that happened to me ever. As the years passed, Susan's story became one she shared not with sorrow, but with strength. She never erased her past. She reframed it. At a national youth advocacy conference, she closed her keynote speech with words that would later be quoted across programs and shelters nationwide. "I was left behind before I could speak," she said. "But I was also chosen before I could understand love. One woman gave me life, another man gave me meaning." After the applause faded, she stepped off the stage and found Gabriel waiting, older now, slower in his steps but steady in presence. He looked at her proudly. "You turned out all right, soldier." She smiled warmly. "I had the best commanding officer." They embraced, not bound by blood, but by every choice, sacrifice, and moment that had built their bond. And as Susan looked back on her life, the abandonment, the questions, the search, the healing, she realized her identity had never been rooted in who left. It had always been rooted in who stayed.